Hello, my name is Bill, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus Christ. Hi, everybody. In the Bible, testimony is a sharing of one's personal experience and reflections of God's work in their life. It is a core concept in Christianity and is considered a command from God. 2 Timothy 1:8 says, "Do not be ashamed of the testimony about our Lord." Revelation 12:11 says, "And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony." I was born at a young age to Bill and June Mackey. I was the youngest of four children and the only boy. My father worked for Tulare Home Dairy delivering milk, and he would make donuts for my grandparents when he was off work, who owned a Snow White Drive-In in Tulare. It's an old-fashioned burger joint. One of the earliest memories I had of my biological father was when he would take me on his delivery milk route. Back then, a lot of people would get their dairy products delivered directly to people's homes. He told me the best way to get to know the dogs on the route, because there was a lot of dogs in the country, was to keep dog treats and bribe the dogs. My mother would stay home with us kids while he was out working. When I was 6, my parents decided to get a divorce. I was never told anything about the divorce. One day I was asked I asked one of my sisters one day where my dad was, and they replied, "Where do you think he is?" And I truly had no idea. Later in life, I discovered he had been unfaithful to my mother many times, so my mother had enough. That's when she had to start working to support us kids. She was a waitress at Nilsson's restaurant in Tulare for almost 20 years. We relied on her income as a waitress and welfare, as my father did not pay much child support. When my parents were together, they would bring us to church as a family. My mother played the piano, and my dad was involved in the youth ministry. So living with 3 older sisters and my mother, my life had become unmanageable at an early age. Even the dog was female. For the next six years of my life was in turmoil. Felt like my sisters constantly would fight, and the weekends were very lonely. My mom would go out with her new friends, and my sisters had their boyfriends and their boyfriends that would stay out late. The TV was basically my babysitter. I'd rarely see my father. When I was about 8 or 9, my father and I took a trip to Vegas. He said he was looking for work. I thought we would spend time together instead. He left me at my aunt and uncle's house as he looked for work. Me and my cousin would stay with his grandparents for the summer, where we would ride motorcycles and go swimming in the hot Vegas heat. So in short, I felt like he just abandoned me there. A short time later, my mother brought me back home along with my sisters. When I was about 12, my mother met the man that she would marry for the next 30 years. He is a good man who accepted my mother for who she was. I learned a lot from my stepdad. He taught me that what it meant to support a family. We moved into a new house and got my own room. Slowly, my sisters began to move out. First, my oldest moved out when I was 9. She got pregnant with twins, so I became an uncle at 9 years old. My other older sister decided to move in with my biological father and his new family. When I was about 13 is when I tried drugs for the first time. My youngest sister hung out with her friends and liked to party and do drugs. And when my parents were out of town, that was my first experience with marijuana. They showed me how to hit the bong. One day, my stepdad found out about the drugs and kicked my sister out of the house. I was very upset. Seeing all my sisters leave the house, I thought I would be next, but luckily, I wasn't. I made friends with the twin boys across the street, hanging out at their house when their mother was at work. That's when I was introduced to pornography. Other moms, boys, friends kept Playboys or other magazines in his nightstand, where we would sneak in and look at the magazines. That was their mom's boyfriend. About 3 years after living there, my mom and stepdad decided to buy a new house on a better side of town. It was great. My stepdad bought me a motorcycle, which was even better. We lived in a new suburb, so there was plenty of places for me to ride. This is where I met a new set of friends. We were a group of about 10 or 12 of us where we would go riding out to a place called the Swing. We would ride 4 or 5 miles down ditch banks east where there was a big tree with a rope and a flat weight tied to the end of it. This is where we would party during the summertime and on the weekends. One of my party friends was able to buy some weed from one of his sister's boyfriends. So to keep our weekends high and happy, we would sell the pot during the school week and party on the weekends. So if you went to Tulare High school between 1979 and 1983 and you liked to party, you probably bought some weed from me or my buddy. We never got caught. In my junior year of high school, I fell into a deep depression. I didn't understand the reason for the depression until later in life. I was having abandonment issues. I had lost 2 girlfriends within 2 months, which triggered the depression. One of my buddies and I would hang out and play music together on weekends. One weekend he came over ready to practice. He brought his gear. When I told him that I wouldn't be able to play, my parents were gone for the weekend and I had taken half a bottle of sleeping pills. He was determined not to let me fall asleep. He spent the rest of the night and early the next morning keeping me awake. Finally, during that time, he talked me into chugging a bottle of Jack Daniels, where I ended up throwing up most of the sleeping pills and the Jack Daniels. And needless to say, I had the worst hangover of my life. After the hangover was finally ended, I decided it was time to make a change in my life. The next weekend, I asked my grandparents if I could go to church with them. I remember going to Sunday school with my grandparents when I was little, so at 17, I got saved. I would go to Sunday school on the weekends and church at night. After Sunday school, I would go over to my grandparents where we would play their favorite board game called Aggravation. While my grandmother was cooking dinner, my grandfather and I would talk about the Bible, and sometimes we'd play chess. My grandfather was a huge influence in my life. Before my new stepdad came into the picture, my grandfather would take me on long motorcycle rides together, and we would talk about the history of California and other places we would ride to. On Sundays, my grandmother would fix us a steak, baked potato, and salad. My grandfather was a licensed minister and started the church that we were attending. It was a very strict apostolic church. I met my first wife at a church conference from that same organization that was happening in Fresno at the time. We dated for a short time. We got married after 9 months of dating, and we were married for 24 years and had 2 beautiful girls, which we raised in the apostolic faith. We had a good life together for many years. My wife was highly involved in ladies' ministry, and I was involved in music ministry as a bass player. My girls were involved in bus ministry to help pick up underprivileged children for Sunday school. Life seemed to be going well until it wasn't. 2007, my pastor wanted to see me into his office. He told me my ex-wife was having an affair with my best friend. I was devastated. That night, when she came home, she admitted to me and to my kids that she had been having a romantic relationship with my friend, who was also married. The next 6 months was very difficult. I was doing what I thought I could to try to repair my broken marriage. I had no idea how to fix it. 6 months later, she was seeing him again. After that, I asked her to leave. She went over her brother's house for a few months, and I was thinking, well, that will wake her up and she'll come back, but it didn't. I came home early one day from work, and she and her family were moving the furniture out of the house. She was moving into her own apartment. I thought that she wouldn't be there very long since she didn't have a full-time job, but as it turned out, she wanted to live her life separate from mine. I stopped paying attention to what was going on in my home. I stopped caring about my marriage. I realized that I was the main contributor to my failed marriage. I took my wife and my marriage for granted, and it failed. About a month after this, my kids said that they wanted to move in with their mother. I was devastated again. I felt that I had failed my kids. I was working 2 jobs to keep up with the bills and was not spending very much time with my kids through everything that was happening. This is where my downward spiral spiral started. I would get up early most mornings and go to church and pray. Last time I prayed at the church, I told God that I wasn't coming back to that church and that he had abandoned me. God was wanting to see how I would respond to the storm, and I responded badly. I started drinking and to feel numb. I would come home after work, get drunk. Sometimes I would cry, sometimes I'd get angry, but the alcohol was not fixing my issues. After about 6 months of that, I started going online, looking at dating sites and seeing how easy it was to see pornography online. I knew that the women on these movies were broken and abused, but I didn't care. My depression had turned into hate. Subconsciously, I had hated women. And for the next 3 to 4 years, I would chase loose women, watching pornography, knowing that the other side was a hurting soul. I wanted to hurt others because I was hurting. I was playing the victim. Alcohol was my friend, and porn was my lover. Shortly after this time is when I met my wife. We had an instant connection, and we moved very quickly in our relationship. Too fast. We met in September, and we moved in together in January. My current wife and I got married September 4th, 2015, 3 years after we met. About 9 months before we got married, my father died. I had seen him 2 months before he had passed. He had Parkinson's and emphysema. I never really felt any sadness over his passing. I never really knew him. A year later, my mother passed away. It's around the same time as my father did. She had been fighting pancreatic cancer and had finally metastasized. I took her dying very hard. A year after 2016, my ex-wife and friend, who was the lead singer of the band that I was playing in, they both died the same day, within hours of each other. I took my ex-wife's death hard because she was the mother of my children, but I had discovered in therapy later that I'd felt if we were still together, she wouldn't have died. This was an unfounded fear. I took my friend's dying hard because he wasn't a believer, and I knew the truth. This is when I started isolating. I would go to work, come home, sit alone in the back room. My new wife would come into the bedroom, try to talk to me, but I had started shutting her out and everybody else. My dark depression had returned. Robin looked on my laptop and found that I was looking at porn on my computer. I denied it and blamed my stepson. I was in total denial. That was the problem. Until one day I decided to come clean. That is when I admitted to my wife that I had been watching porn after she went to bed. We started going to counseling together. When the counselor suggested that I go to CR, I felt like it was an ultimatum. I felt my life was out of control and that if I had just kept it to myself, things wouldn't have turned out the way they did. I would come into CR in the worship service, then halfway through it, I'd leave, go to a movie, go hang out somewhere, so my wife thought that I was there. But I kept going and began to realize that maybe I do have a problem. I went through the motions for another 6 months and even got a sponsor. I had a wake-up call one day after having a bad day. I was talking to my sponsor. He told me that I was having withdrawals. And I said, withdrawals? Addicts go through withdrawals, not people like me, I said to myself. I had many other low moments and constant relapses. I was still looking for the secret elixir that would keep me sober, and I was looking for another addiction to help me with my addiction. Part of that elixir was stop trying to be sober for my wife and start being sober for myself. I did my first step study, and shortly after that decision, I discovered more about myself than my addictions, and I'm a big advocate of 12 steps that we talk about here at CR. I knew I was a better man than I was living. I realized that I could be labeled a pervert or a drunk. I found no such judgment when I came to CR. Even after going over my inventory with my sponsor, he did not give me a judgmental response, but one of forgiveness and healing. I began to realize the battles with porn and addiction is a battle of the mind. Romans 2:12, Amplified, says, "And do not be conformed to this world any longer with its superficial values and customs, but be transformed and progressively changed as you mature spiritually by the renewing of your mind, by focusing on godly values and ethical attitudes, so that you may prove for yourself what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect in his plan and purpose for you." One day I was researching about porn addiction and I came across an article. The night before his death, Ted Bundy was interviewed by James Dobson, the founder of Focus on the Family. One segment, Bundy told Dr. Dobson about the effect of porn addiction on his life. Like most addictions, Bundy said, "I would keep looking for more potent, more explicit, more graphic kinds of material. Like any addiction, you keep craving something which is harder, something that will give you a greater sense of excitement, till you reach the point that pornography only goes so far." Bundy added, "I've lived in prison for a long time. I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me, and without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography. Without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed addiction of pornography," unquote. It's true, not everybody who views pornography will end up do such terrible crimes, but that doesn't mean the use of porn is harmless. Frequently, those who are addicted to pornography describe how they end up in a situation beyond their control. Sin will take you further than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. Over the next 2 to 3 years, I continued to go to CR and work on my recovery. However, I would have relapse after relapse. I would struggle to stay sober. I would go 2-3 months at a time and relapse again. Finally, I achieved a 6-month chip, though I thought I had control over my addiction. So my wife and I got an opportunity to open a new retirement community in Massachusetts. So we moved to Massachusetts. We had worked together for years in the same industry. My wife was born and raised in Massachusetts, so she had family there. So we reestablished our lives in Billerica, Massachusetts. We were very busy with the new building and construction, hiring all employees. During this time, I relapsed again. I was working hard at work, but not working on my recovery. I didn't tell anybody I'd relapsed, so I was back to hiding my sins again. This is the beginning of another split up with my wife. We had split up twice before. This time, it was different. My wife found the phone that I was using for my addiction. I lied to her again about my addiction. If I would have owned up to it, things would not have gone as badly as they did. I later told her I can't stop. My wife started making plans to leave me again and go back to California, and she did. So I responded badly again. I gave my wife and my recovery the middle finger. I was tired of the struggle, so I gave in to my temptations and did what I wanted. The stress of running the community alone and going through another divorce put me back into giving into my lustful thoughts and desires. I had stopped going to church and to CR and started getting weaker and weaker in my recovery. I did many things that I was ashamed of. But God saw what was happening to me and my wife. And even though we were done with each other, God wasn't done with us. God sent me a vision of what my life was about to look like outside of God's will for me. I was terrified that what God had showed me, he told me that I was going to be worse than my biological father. That was what I needed to hear to wake up, to do what I needed to do to straighten up and fly right. That was to get back in recovery, fix things with my wife. This is my real rock bottom. While God was working on me, God was also working on my wife. I don't remember what God was doing with her, but she booked a flight back to Boston. I don't even remember the reason she gave for coming back, but I'm glad she did. We have been together ever since and without any slip-ups. And since then, we've decided to remove the D word from our relationship. For another year or so, my wife and I gave up being managers and started traveling managers for the same company. During that time, we had moved back to our house in Clovis. As managers, we would travel the country, filling in for managers on vacation or a vacancy until they could fill it. We would be gone for weeks at a time and be home for a few days before leaving again. During that time, my wife and I would look for work here in this area. I would still struggle with things and wanted to be more consistent with going to church and my recovery. So, in May 2023, God gave my wife her dream job. 4 months later, God gave me a great job. I believe God allowed me to go through all of that so that I could see His grace and His mercy. Since we came back to California, God's hand has been on my wife and I. We have gotten stronger. I replaced my old bad habits with new habits. Instead of drinking alcohol, I drink coffee. Instead of going to clubs and bars, I go to church and CR. I no longer hide and isolate when I have a relapse. I talk to somebody that understands what I'm going through and not trying to work it out on my own. Isolation got me into my addiction. Not isolating has gotten me out. God allowed me a way of escape. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you that is common to man. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond our ability, but with the temptation, He will also provide a way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So I stand here, still recovering alcoholic and sex addict, but now I think about how to be a better man, how to be a better husband. My life has taken a dramatic turnaround, so now I need to give back what God has blessed me with by telling others of the gift of God that He has given me, by volunteering at CR, joining worship groups, by joining Bible studies and small groups and several men's groups. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. Isaiah 40:31. I believe this scripture means that waiting on the Lord as a waiter or a servant, not sitting around waiting for God to do something. Galatians 6:9, and let us not be weary in well-doing, for in season we shall reap if we faint not. Thank you for allowing me to tell my story. I pray that you will see what CR has to offer and take advantage of the recovery God has for you to be a better person today than you were yesterday. Thank you.